Welcome to Empathy Stories, where we delve into extraordinary tales of courage, resilience, and the power of standing up for what's right. Today, we bring you the gripping story of Rachel Carter, a retired Navy SEAL seeking peace in a quiet town, only to uncover a dangerous criminal network. Stay tuned for a journey of bravery, redemption, and the strength of community. The sun hung low over the rugged Wyoming plains, casting a warm, golden light across the quiet town of Falcon Ridge. Life here moved at a deliberate pace. The streets were lined with modest shops, a few gas stations, and the centerpiece of it all, Maggie's Diner. Known for its homemade pies and bottomless coffee, Maggie's was a place where everyone felt welcome. It wasn't glamorous, but it was the heart of the town, a refuge for locals and travelers alike. Inside the diner, the air was filled with the comforting hum of life, the clink of silverware against plates, soft conversations, and the occasional burst of laughter made the place feel alive. Behind the counter, Maggie herself bustled about, with her kind eyes and silver hair pulled back in a neat bun. She greeted everyone with the warmth of an old friend. Rachel Carter sat at a corner booth, her hands wrapped around a steaming mug of coffee. She looked out of place in the best way, a quiet, composed figure with sharp eyes that missed nothing. Her dark hair was tied back in a no-nonsense ponytail, and beneath her leather jacket, a faint outline of a tattoo hinted at her past. The eagle and trident emblem of the Navy SEALs peeked from under her sleeve, a mark of years spent in combat zones most people could never imagine. Rachel had come to Falcon Ridge looking for peace. After 15 years as a Navy SEAL, she craved quiet moments like this, a chance to breathe, to reflect, and to escape the ghosts that followed her. Maggie approached her table, a fresh pot of coffee in hand. "You're too young to look so tired, sweetheart," Maggie said, her voice warm and maternal as she poured more coffee into Rachel's cup. Rachel offered a faint smile. "Just one of those days." Maggie gave her a knowing look. She didn't pry. People came to Maggie's Diner for comfort, not interrogation. Still, she noticed the way Rachel always chose the booth facing the door. Her back never turned, her posture always alert. Maggie didn't know the details of Rachel's past, but she could sense the weight the younger woman carried. The peaceful moment shattered as the roar of motorcycle engines filled the air. The sound was jarring, aggressive, and it drew the attention of every patron in the diner. The engines grew louder until they stopped abruptly in the parking lot. Through the windows, Rachel watched as 3 motorcycles pulled up, their riders dismounting with a swagger that spoke of trouble. The Iron Fangs had arrived. The gang was infamous in Falcon Ridge, a small but ruthless group that thrived on intimidation and exploitation. Their leader, Red, was a tall, broad-shouldered man with a scar running down the side of his face, a souvenir from a life lived recklessly. He was flanked by 2 lieutenants, Viper, a wiry man with a perpetual smirk, and Tank, a towering figure of muscle who looked as though he could crush a steel pipe with his bare hands. The diner grew quiet as the bikers walked in. Conversations halted mid-sentence, and even Maggie's ever-present smile faltered slightly. Red scanned the room with a predatory gaze, his eyes lingering on Rachel for a moment before turning to Maggie. "Evening, Maggie," Red drawled, his voice thick with feigned charm. "We missed you at the town meeting last night." Mayor Hayes was disappointed. Maggie's hands trembled slightly as she set the coffee pot on the counter. "I had inventory to do," she said, her voice steady despite the tension in the room. "You know how it is." Red leaned on the counter, his scar twisting as he smiled. Sure. But see, when the mayor calls a meeting, it's not really optional. He's trying to help this town grow, and he needs everyone's support." His hand came down hard on the counter, making Maggie flinch. Rachel's eyes narrowed, her coffee forgotten. She watched the scene unfold, cataloging every detail: the knife in Viper's boot, the pistol poorly concealed under Tank's jacket, the uneasy glances of the other patrons. "Maybe," Maggie said, finding her voice again, "the mayor should focus on running the town instead of letting criminals dictate policy." The diner fell silent. Red's smile disappeared, replaced by a menacing glare. "What did you just say to me?" "Old woman," he growled, his voice low and dangerous. Before Maggie could respond, Rachel stood. Her movement was deliberate, calm, yet it commanded attention. She walked to the counter, her boots echoing softly against the floor, and placed herself between Red and Maggie. She said, Rachel began, her voice quiet but firm, that the mayor should do his job. Red turned to face her, his jaw tightening. "And who the hell are you?" Rachel met his gaze without flinching. "Just someone who's seen enough bullies for one lifetime." The room held its breath. Red laughed, a hollow, mocking sound, and gestured to his men. "You hear that? She's got a smart mouth. Let's see if her fists are as quick." Viper and Tank moved toward Rachel, but she didn't flinch. Years of training kicked in. In one fluid motion, she caught Red's wrist as he reached for her, applying precise pressure that made his fingers spasm. His bravado evaporated as she twisted his arm behind his back and pressed him against the counter. "Listen carefully," Rachel said, her voice low and steady. "You've got 3 choices. 1. You and your friends leave now, and we forget this happened. 2. You try something stupid, and I send all 3 of you to the hospital. Or 3, she increased the pressure, making Red wince. We find out how many bones I can break before you hit the floor." Viper froze, his hand hovering near his knife. "Let him go," he stammered. Rachel's gaze shifted to him. "I wouldn't," she said coolly. "Your draw is slow, and by the time you clear that blade, this'll be over." The tension was palpable, the room deathly silent. Finally, Red raised his free hand in surrender. All right, we're leaving," he said, his voice tight with pain. Rachel released him, stepping back to give him space. The bikers retreated, their attempts to look menacing undercut by the way Red rubbed his wrist. As they mounted their bikes, Red shot Rachel one last glare through the window. "You'll regret this," he spat before they roared away into the night. Maggie let out a shaky breath, her hands still trembling. "Who are you?" she whispered. Rachel sat back down at her booth, picking up her now cold coffee. She offered a faint smile. "Just someone who's seen enough bullies." But as she watched the bikers disappear down the road, Rachel knew Red was right about one thing. This wasn't over. The days following the confrontation at Maggie's diner were marked by an uneasy stillness in Falcon Ridge. For the locals, the fear of the Iron Fangs lingered like a dark cloud over their daily lives. Rachel Carter could feel it too. It wasn't just the bikers' parting threats. It was the quiet knowledge that trouble was brewing. And it wasn't going away on its own. Trouble didn't just fade, it festered. Rachel had spent years trusting her instincts, and now they screamed at her to dig deeper. The Iron Fangs were more than a gang throwing their weight around in a small town. Their confidence, their weapons, and their control over Falcon Ridge's mayor hinted at something bigger. She didn't come to Falcon Ridge looking for a fight, but now it seemed the fight had come to her. One morning, as the first rays of sunlight broke over the mountains, Sheriff Jack Walker's patrol truck pulled up to Maggie's diner. Jack, a weathered man in his late 40s, had the look of someone who had spent years trying to keep his town together with duct tape and sheer willpower. He stepped inside, tipping his hat to Maggie before heading straight to Rachel, who sat at her usual corner booth. "Mind if I sit?" Jack asked, his tone low. Rachel nodded, gesturing to the seat across from her. Jack Saturday glancing around the diner to make sure no one was paying them undue attention. "I heard about what happened with Red and his boys," he said. "Not a lot of people stand up to them, let alone walk away in one piece." Rachel met his gaze evenly. "They're bullies. Bullies back down when someone stands up to them." Jack let out a dry chuckle. "Maybe so, but the Iron Fangs aren't your run-of-the-mill bullies. Red's got connections, serious ones. I've been keeping tabs on them for years, but there's only so much I can do without backup. In this town, it's too scared to back me up." Rachel's eyes narrowed. "What kind of connections?" Jack hesitated, weighing how much he could trust her. Finally, he leaned in, lowering his voice. "They're tied into something bigger than this town. Bigger than you and me. Weapons smuggling. From what I've gathered, they've got trucks moving through Falcon Ridge on a regular basis. Officially, they're hauling farm equipment or construction supplies. But my gut tells me it's something far more dangerous. Rachel frowned, her mind already piecing together the puzzle. And the mayor? Jack sighed. Hayes is in their pocket. He calls it economic development. I call it what it is, corruption. Every time I try to act, orders come down from the state level telling me to back off. Someone's protecting them. Rachel sat back, her coffee forgotten. This was worse than she'd thought. The Iron Fangs weren't just a local menace. They were part of a network. A machine running on fear and dirty money. I need names, Rachel said finally, and any intel you've got on their operations. Jack raised an eyebrow. You planning to take them on yourself? Rachel's jaw tightened. I've seen what happens when people like this are left unchecked. It doesn't stop. It doesn't go away. It only gets worse. Jack studied her for a moment, then nodded. Meet me in my office after sundown. I'll show you what I've got. That evening, Rachel found herself in the cramped, dimly lit back office of the sheriff's station. Jack spread out a collection of maps, photos, and handwritten notes on the desk. He pointed to one of the photos, a grainy image of a heavily armed man flanked by two others. That's Victor Kane, Jack said. He's the one pulling the strings, runs the operation from the shadows. But I've heard whispers he's expanding. He sees Falcon Ridge as the perfect hub, small, isolated, easy to control. Rachel's eyes lingered on Kane's face. There was something about him that stirred an old memory. The name rang a bell too. Finally, it clicked. Victor Kane, she said, her voice colder now. I've heard that name before. He was in Fallujah, arms dealer, middleman for some of the worst players in the business. He was there when my team lost 2 men. Jack's expression shifted. This is personal for you, isn't it? Rachel nodded, her mind already racing. Kane wasn't just another criminal. He was a ghost from her past. Someone who had caused pain she hadn't yet been able to avenge. Jack, we can't do this alone, she said. We need allies. I've got one idea, Jack said hesitantly. There's another biker club in the region, the Steel Wolves. They're not like the Iron Fangs. Most of their members are former military. They keep to themselves, but they don't tolerate criminal activity in their territory. Rachel's interest peaked. You think they'd help? Maybe. They hate the Iron Fangs as much as anyone. And if you can convince them you're the real deal, they might be willing to listen. The next day, Rachel and Jack made the trek to the Steel Wolves clubhouse, a weathered building surrounded by a half-circle of motorcycles. The Steel Wolves were wary at first. Their leader, Colton Iron Hayes, greeting them with a skeptical look. What brings a sheriff and a stranger to our door? Iron asked, his gravelly voice carrying a hint of curiosity. Rachel stepped forward, meeting his gaze. We got a problem. The Iron Fangs are moving weapons through Falcon Ridge. Their operation is growing, and it's only a matter of time before it spills into your territory. Iron crossed his arms. And you think we should care why? Because Victor Kane is behind it, Rachel said evenly. Iron's eyes narrowed, and the room fell silent. The name carried weight. After a moment, he spoke. What do you need? Rachel laid it out. Intelligence, manpower, and a coordinated effort to disrupt the Iron Fangs operations. Iron listened carefully, his gaze never leaving hers. Finally, he nodded. All right, he said, but we do this my way. No cowboy stuff. You've got your methods. We've got ours. We work together, but we stay smart. Rachel nodded. Deal. As they shook hands, Rachel felt a spark of hope. The pieces were falling into place. With Jack, the Steel Wolves, and her own expertise, she had a chance to take down Kane's operation. It wouldn't be easy, but Rachel had learned long ago that the hardest fights were the ones most worth fighting. And this one? This one was personal. The quiet night in Falcon Ridge was broken by the low growl of motorcycles and the muted crackle of radios. The Steel Wolves were in position, their bikes scattered across strategic points around town. Rachel Carter stood atop an abandoned grain silo overlooking the main road, her dark eyes scanning the streets below. Her SEAL instincts told her everything was about to converge here, at this small Wyoming town that Victor Kane had chosen for his empire's expansion. Beside her, Sheriff Jack Walker adjusted the strap of his rifle. "You sure about this?" he asked, his voice low, almost drowned out by the distant rumble of thunder. Rachel didn't look away from the horizon. "If we wait, they'll get stronger. If we act now, we can stop them before they dig in. I'm sure." Below, the steel wolves moved like shadows, their military precision evident even in their civilian garb. Colton Iron Hayes coordinated the bikers with calm efficiency, his voice steady over the radio. Rachel had earned his trust, but she knew it was a fragile alliance. The Steel Wolves had agreed to help because of Kane, but they made it clear they weren't here to clean up the town's mess. This was about their own territory, their own code. The first convoy appeared just after midnight, a line of nondescript trucks escorted by armed bikers from the Iron Fangs. Rachel watched through binoculars, noting their formation, their weapons, their blind spots. "Convoy spotted," she said in her radio. "Iron, are your boys ready?" Iron's voice came back, steady and calm. "We're set. On your go." Rachel turned to Jack. "You stay back. Keep the locals out of this. We can't afford civilian casualties." Jack nodded, though the tension in his jaw betrayed his frustration. He wanted to be in the thick of it, but he trusted Rachel's judgment. He'd seen what she was capable of. "Steel Wolves, move in," Rachel ordered. The ambush unfolded with clockwork precision. The Steel Wolves' motorcycles roared to life, their riders cutting off the convoy at the narrow pass leading out of town. The Iron Fangs weren't prepared for the sudden assault. Rachel moved in from the flank, her team taking out the convoy's rear vehicles to box them in. Gunfire erupted, sharp and loud in the still night. Rachel's training kicked in, her movements fluid and calculated. She disarmed one guard with a quick strike to his wrist and knocked him unconscious with the butt of her rifle. Another came at her with a knife, but she sidestepped, twisting his arm and sending him sprawling. The Iron Fangs fought back fiercely, but they weren't prepared for the level of coordination they faced. The Steel Wolves, with their military backgrounds, dismantled their defenses systematically. Rachel's small team, a mix of Steel Wolves and trusted locals, held the high ground, providing cover fire and ensuring the Fangs couldn't escape. Amid the chaos, Rachel's focus sharpened on the lead truck. She knew Kane was there, or if not, something that would tie him to this operation. She made her way through the melee, her movements deliberate and swift. Reaching the truck, Rachel yanked the door open, her weapon trained on the driver. "Ow! Now," she barked. The driver complied, hands raised, fear in his eyes. Inside the cab, Rachel found what she was looking for, a locked briefcase. She grabbed it and signaled to Iron over the radio. "Convoy neutralized. I've got the package. We need to regroup." Iron's voice came back, clipped and focused. "Copy that. Fall back to the safe zone." The aftermath of the battle was a mixture of triumph and exhaustion. The Steel Wolves and Rachel's team regrouped at an abandoned barn outside of town. The Iron Fangs who survived had been subdued and disarmed, their trucks confiscated. Rachel set the briefcase on a makeshift table and began working on the lock. Inside, she found exactly what she had hoped for: documents, ledgers, and a list of names. Kane's network laid bare. Iron leaned over her shoulder, scanning the contents. "This is enough to bury him," he said. "If we get this to the feds, they'll take him down." Rachel nodded, but didn't look up. Her mind was racing, piecing together the next steps. This wasn't over. Not yet. Underscore, 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 underscore. By dawn, the federal agents were swarming Falcon Ridge. Sheriff Jack Walker stood at the diner, watching as agents loaded the confiscated evidence into unmarked vans. Rachel stood nearby, her arms crossed, her expression unreadable. "You did it," Jack said, his tone carrying a mix of admiration and relief. "Kane's done." Rachel shook her head. This was just one piece. Kane's still out there. And so is his network. We cut off a limb, but the body's still moving. Jack sighed. You can't save the whole world. Rachel. I'm not trying to, she replied. Just the parts that cross my path. Maggie approached with a tray of coffee. Her warm smile returning for the first time since the iron fangs had rolled into her diner weeks ago. You've done more than most would, she said, setting a cup in front of Rachel. This town owes you. Rachel offered a small smile. This town owes itself. People stood up. They fought back. That's what makes the difference. Iron and his steel wolves approached, their presence commanding as ever. We're heading out, Iron said. We've got our own problems to deal with. Rachel extended her hand. Thanks for the help. Iron shook it firmly. You're a hell of a fighter. Carter, if you ever need backup, you know where to find us. As the steel wolves rode off into the horizon, Rachel felt a strange mix of emotions. Satisfaction at what they had achieved, but an unshakable awareness of the work still ahead. She'd come to Falcon Ridge looking for peace, but she had found purpose instead. Later that evening, Rachel sat on the diner's porch, watching the sunset paint the sky in hues of gold and crimson. Maggie joined her, a quiet presence that didn't demand conversation. Do you think it's over? Maggie asked softly. Rachel took a long sip of her coffee before answering. It's never over, but it's better. And sometimes, that's enough. In the distance, the faint rumble of motorcycles echoed, a reminder of the alliances forged and the battles won. Rachel Carter had made Falcon Ridge safer, but she knew her fight wasn't just for one town. There were other places, other people who needed someone willing to stand up, to protect, to fight. And Rachel was ready. Thank you for joining us on Empathy Stories. Rachel Carter's incredible journey reminds us that standing up to injustice can ignite change, even in the face of overwhelming odds. If this story inspired you, please like, share, and subscribe for more moving tales that celebrate the power of human connection and resilience. Until next time, stay courageous and spread empathy wherever you go.